The movement of a canoe is like a reed in the wind. Silence is part of it, and the sounds of lapping water, bird songs, and the wind in the trees. It's a part of the medium through which it floats, the sky, the water, and the shores. A man is part of his canoe, and therefore part of all it knows. The instant he dips his paddle, he flows as it flows. The canoe yielding to his slightest touch, and responsive to his every whim and thought. There is magic in the feel of a paddle and the movement of a canoe, a magic compounded of distance, adventure, solitude, and peace. The way of a canoe is the way of the wilderness, and of a freedom almost forgotten, the open door to waterways of ages past, and a way of life with profound and abiding satisfaction. Sigurd Olson, The Singing Wilderness.
In Minnesota, the Boundary Waters was formed in 1964 as the very first wilderness area in America. The 1964 Wilderness Act was signed, and in the Wilderness Act was mentioned the Boundary Waters canoe area being called the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. So the designation was made in 1964. The reason that that's so important is over 1 million acres is now set aside as wilderness in northern Minnesota, and our friends in Canada also set aside a little bit over 1 million acres for wilderness in Canada. So over 2 million acres are now set aside in the Boundary Waters and the Quetico for wilderness canoe travel. Sigurd Olson was one of the proponents to help save the Boundary Waters as wilderness.
Well, in the 60s, when I was taking kids up there, about the second year that I went, I realized, after having visited around Ely, around the town, that there were some well-known people there in that town, and one of them was an author, and he was also a school teacher there in Ely that was at the junior college, and his name was Sigurd Olson. And I thought, well, you know, here's a person that has written a book or two, and I found the book, and one of the books, and I began to read it and realized that his love of the wilderness was sincere, and it was such that he wanted to do something about helping save it. And so this was probably a year or two after they designated the Boundary Waters, so 65, 66. And I thought, well, would it be neat that he lives there if he would talk to my kids that I brought? And I thought, well, the outgoing person I am, I just picked up the phone in town and called a phone number that was in the book, and he answered, and I thought, wow, that's cool. And so he said, well, I just live 3 or 4 blocks from downtown Ely there, and said, come on up. And I thought, well, that's great. And so I took the van load of kids, and we went up, and they weren't really kids, they were 16-year-old young men, and one of them was Brian Wofford.
He called Olson, got permission to go out. I'm pretty sure it was 1969 when we met him. We got pictures, he and I and Nelson together, and one of the pictures was standing next to a rock wall that he writes about in one of his books, either The Singing Wilderness or Listening Point, about him gathering rocks on all his trips and bringing them back to his yard and stacking them up in this rock wall and talking about it. One of the pictures is next to that rock wall at the edge of his property.
But anyway, Brian was with me as we walked around Sig Olson's yard and visited, and we saw the building where he'd written his books and his little cabin, and within about 50 feet, 40 feet of his house. But as we walked around, he talked about the pile of stones and other things in his yard, and he talked about the interest he had in saving things that were beautiful, and Boundary Waters being one of them. And we really enjoyed that day and took some photos, and I didn't know how important they were going to be, or I would have really taken more of them and perhaps and tried to save them over time, because I'm not positive where they are, and we've moved 2 or 3 times. So anyway, so we're there and we're in the yard, and this began a friendship of when you guys come up from Tennessee, be sure that you come, or if I'm here, come on over here and visit with us. So in the 60s with Brian and others that were on that trip, we began that tradition of trying to see Olson if he was in town, the times he was there. So as I began to read his writings and understanding what he stood for, it was kind of some of the things that I had believed in as a young person, and as a teacher, I wanted to make a difference in people's lives, and I was going directly to the person and either teaching and coaching or working with those youngsters hand in hand. And Olson's idea was to save parts of the world or parts of the country, our country, that could be utilized by those young people and get in the outdoors. Later on in life, I found out that he wasn't a very popular man in his town, in his time, because out in the wilderness areas there was resorts, and he determined at some point, and others too, that if they set it aside, that those would have to go, and the livelihood of those people would probably go with it. And so I think, according to some of the stuff I read, that in Ely he was threatened often, and he was threatened pretty harshly, and at some point they may have even hung his some little dummy that represented Olson somewhere around town. So anyway, it was not easy on he and his wife Elizabeth and his sons or his family, and so that was difficult. But as I read the books, they became to me something that I cherished. And whether I was reading The Singing Wilderness or Runes of the North or The Lonely Land, especially The Lonely Land, because I had thought about trying to make a long canoe trip like he had done. And after he came back and had written that book on The Lonely Land, well, not just after that, but during the time he'd been in Ely, and YMCA Camp Ouija being close to town within 15-20 miles, that they struck up this relationship too of standing for the same sorts of things, wanting to use the wilderness areas, and they had been using them, and then Olson wanting to try to get those designated and set aside. So
I didn't understand much of the significance of it, but I had just finished the book, The Lonely Land, which kind of set me up for the right attitude to have for that first Minnesota trip. And then meeting Olson. I have no idea whether Nelson knows how all that weaved together just perfectly to set me up for that trip, but I think he did a pretty good job.
Last year I was able to visit Listening Point, and that is a cabin and property that Sig Olson built, I believe, in the 1950s. He had left his job as a professor and wanted only to concentrate on writing wilderness writings. And he lived in downtown Ely, which is not a huge bustling town. And he had his home, and right outside of his home, just a few yards away, was a small outbuilding called the Shack. And that's where he did all of his writing for all of his books, was in the Shack. But the place where he got his inspiration for his books was Listening Point. And he bought this small piece of acreage right outside of Ely on Burnside Lake. And he looked for a couple of years for the specific spot. He wanted a piece of granite. He wanted a sandy beach. He wanted trees. He wanted a place where there would not be a lot of commotion. He wanted quiet. So he found this place. He bought it, and first thing that he did was to put a small building on it. And he, if I'm not mistaken, the person that he bought the building from, it was either a blacksmith shop or a chicken coop, one or the other. And he bought this little building for like $100 or $200 and had it trucked to Listening Point and set out there as the first building. It became his sauna eventually. Also on that piece of land, he has a a place for his firewood. He has a little outhouse. He has a dock, a sandy beach, an area that's mostly greenstone and granite where is the actual listening point. Then he had his small one-room cabin. And in this cabin, this is the place where he would go not to write. He wasn't there doing research. He was there just listening. You walk into this cabin, and in it, on all the walls are paddles that people have given him through the years. Anytime he would go to a speaking engagement, somebody would give him a paddle. So he had all these paddles all over the wall. He had a canoe inside hanging from the rafters. I think it had 2 beds and like a little kitchen table and a little kitchenette and a big fireplace on the other end. And he had 2 chairs in there, 2 rocking chairs. And I remember going in with our guide, not wanting to touch anything, not wanting to sit in a chair. And she assured us that it would be okay to sit in Sig's rocking chair or to sit at the dinner table where Sig would eat. And it was very humbling to be in the place where this proponent of the wilderness sat and engaged with nature and learned what nature had to teach him. So yep, I was able to sit there in his rocking chair and hold his paddle and just enjoy being inside that lodge. It was a very, very interesting place and a very encouraging place for me to be, to learn a little bit more about one of my heroes of conservation, who is Sigurd Olson.
He was very instrumental in helping shape the way I thought about the outdoors and the natural world that we live in. And so he just kind of became a hero for me, and someone that I could cherish going back to read the books time and time again. And I probably read 2 or 3 of his books more than half a dozen times. And so to see what he had put in there and to see the things that would mean and be that would mean much to the heart of the individual about the outdoors and being able to get to that solitude and to those areas and to have them set aside for you is just wonderful. And that had happened in 1964. I've mentioned that, but anyway, Olson was very instrumental in helping me shape what I thought about the Boundary Waters and about the world in general, about trying to save natural places and to utilize those to help you recover from stress or recover from some bad thing that's happened in your life. To be able to go there and experience that was great.